Great. Okay, Gary, thank you very much for coming. We were meant to have Professor Michael Keith, but unfortunately hasn't read his email, so is somewhere else. So he may turn up at some point. But thank you very much for coming. Just to say that Bright Blue is running a project trying to develop a balanced centre-right approach on immigration. And it's a year-long project, and we have various different components to that, one being this commission. We had in August various organisations and experts submit written evidence, and today is an oral evidence session across various different policy areas which are related to immigration. The transcripts from this and the evidence from the written stuff in August will be published in a final report at the end of this year as an appendix, a kind of select committee report. And at the front will be policy recommendations from Bright Blue, which draws on that evidence. The commissioners here from a range of backgrounds and have different perspectives. They won't necessarily endorse every one of those recommendations, but they will have some good questions for you today. So what I'll say is, perhaps if you could introduce yourself and talk a little bit about how immigration affects local communities and public services, and then we'll go into some questioning.
I'm Gary Porter. I'm the leader of South Holland District Council, which is a small rural district in Lincolnshire. I'm also the Conservative group leader at the Local Government Association. Despite popular belief, we are still the largest group, but we don't chair it anymore because of the strange way that the LGA works out is proportionality. And I'm also the chairman of the Conservative Councils Association. And I need to explain right from the start, there isn't a coherent local government association view that crosses all parties, and there isn't even a coherent local government view that crosses any party. So each of the four groups at the LGA will have differences between each other and differences within themselves, particularly the independent group. So, obviously from a broad local government perspective, immigration does have an impact on terms of resource consumption. So education and housing, probably the two most obvious ones. From a small rural district perspective, those demands are quite strong, particularly around education and private sector housing as opposed to state sector housing. There's some demand for our own council stock, but mostly it's pushing up the demand in the private sector. On the plus side of that, from a small rural district perspective, most of my processing industry probably would pack up and leave my district if my E8 migrants weren't there working in them. So there's a tension between the demands that they're placing on the council and also the knowledge that they make our core industries secure. So it's a different set of pressures, I think, probably to London, where obviously there's massive immigration in London, but mainly in hospitality sector and stuff like that. For me, it's core business in my own patch. Our industry is largely low skill, low wage production work, and it needs additional migrant labour to make it sustainable. We have no infrastructure in terms of roads, rail links or airports that make those businesses need to be where we are. We don't produce the products that they process. They bring in products from all over the world and add value and then resend them out. And without a strong migrant labour base, that business wouldn't be there. And as a leader of a council, I stay awake at night wondering what would happen if those businesses went to the wall, because then that's when I would really have the problems. I've got about 11-12% migrant population who are in demand because the work's in demand, but if the work stopped being there, then we would have cohesion problems. Some of my colleagues already have cohesion problems, despite the fact of the positives that are bringing in. There seems to be two very strong groups of people, certainly in rural Lincolnshire, that want the world to be as it was in 1950, and they're the people who can remember 1950, who are old enough not to remember it accurately, and those are the people at one end of the age spectrum, and then there are people at the other end of the age spectrum who never really knew what the 1950s were like, but keep being told by the people who were there how wonderful it was. So so the younger people and the older people I have stronger issues with in terms of cohesion, and there's a big tranche of people in the middle who just, that's life. That's kind of how we are. We just crack on.
Sunday, you had.
Since you're at the very pragmatic end of how do you manage the pressures to secure the benefits, and I think, you know, in terms of both how people feel about it and also the practical element of dealing with it, a lot of it seems to be about pace of change issues. Do you think that, in terms of the experience that you've had over the last decade, are there things that could have been done better where, you know, there's unanticipated flows, or that still need to happen in terms of, you know, if we're operating on data that might be, you know, the census or something that just isn't up to date with what is going to happen to schools, surgeries, or whatever it is? I mean, are there practical changes that have come in that have helped later, or are there changes that you'd still like to see in terms of being able to plan better?
Resource still follows demand too slow, and I don't believe that with the knowledge we've got in the country for the last 100 years of people movement patterns, that we can't anticipate where the peaks and troughs in demand are going to be. It was quite obvious when the Labour government didn't sign the derogation for the E8 countries to come in, that clearly we were going to be a country of choice for those people who were given freedom to move about, because migrant communities go to where migrant communities are. There are very few people who are the first people in any community to push out, but when somebody pushes out, it makes it easier and more secure for people to go to. And we didn't sign the derogation, so we were going to be a place that comes. So we knew then that there was going to be a demand, and the country should have matched that demand with resource. Those areas likely to get an influx of migrant workers should have got more money for housing, should have got more money for schools, should have got more money for doctors and dentists. That way we could have alleviated most of the public conception.
So what's the sort of time gap? So in the end,
still hasn't
the
happened.
local authorities do get more money.
Still hasn't happened.
Because, but the grants are based partly on population, aren't they?
Eventually, but it's always on historic data. And for my patch, I always used to, when the E8 countries, we started getting people in from Latvia and Lithuania, it doesn't matter whether they come from Latvia, Lithuania or Luton. They're not bringing any more resource with them from the government.
Boston, you know, is still not getting any more public funding, despite the fact that it is famously, you know, full of East Europeans, having never experienced significant immigration before.
That's not true.
What isn't true?
Well, either of those. Boston has experienced significant migration before, because it's in Lincolnshire, in rural Lincolnshire. It's my neighbour immediately to the north of me. We've always had people coming in, and they used to come in white vans, and then they used to go home again. Or they used to come in for 3 months, and then they used to go home again. What we've got now
from
is...
abroad? From Eastern Europe?
It doesn't matter from where. They are different.
Well,
people from Sheffield do not speak like the people from Boston. They do not look like the people from Boston.
Part of the same national culture broadly. So there is a
they're
difference.
not.
You're saying people from Sheffield and people from Lincolnshire belong to different national cultures?
Completely. That was the whole thing that was wrong with regional governance. In the East Midlands, we had Nottinghamshire, Derbyshire, and Northamptonshire, and me in Lincolnshire. We've got absolutely nothing in common, culturally or aspirationally, with Nottingham. It's two different planets.
You speak the same language, you have the same queen.
We don't.
You watch the same television programmes.
We don't speak the same language. That's a...
It's a bizarre view of Britain, but anyway.
That is not true. We do not speak the same language.
You have different accents, you speak the same language.
No, and we talk about different things in different ways, and we have different aspirations, and different things rock our boats. That Boston has had more resource than it had before, but in a world where less resources are available. So it might have proportionately slightly more money than it used to get, but it gets considerably less than it needs. Same with South Holland.
You're being a bit wise after the event, aren't you? I mean, could you really have told in 2004 that 1.5 million East Europeans were going to come? I mean, nobody predicted that. You're being a bit hard.
Well, I'm not on about the 1.5 million. I'm on about the 12,000 that I've got, or the 9,000 that Boston have got.
But with school places, you could have spotted something happening when some of the children were born. The need for 5-year-olds.
But why is there such a lag? Why is there such a lag between people arriving, the population expanding, and the money flowing? Why is there such a lag?
Because nobody uses any current live data, do they? We should be
well,
able
there's
to...
a I mean, that's technically, I mean, you couldn't say the data's not there. You could use the labour force survey, school census
We've
data.
not used it for spending. Yeah.
Well, Slough famously did it through the sewage created by. They got Thames Water to show that their population was something like 30% higher than the census.
So is the LGA making proposals about that? That's that technocratic issue of speeding up the pace of resource allocation. I mean, how would you do it?
The LGA, as I said at the start, the LGA hasn't got a common position on this.
But so, what would you just tell us some more about what you would do to sort of speed up and catch up or anticipate?
Given that migration generally follows patterns of migration, you would concentrate on those areas that have already got inward migration of a large scale, and you must surely expect that more migrants will follow them from different countries, because that's what happens. And we could have done that before the 8 countries come in. Somebody could have had a good stab at where will these people choose to come to in the country. What are we going to allow them to do for jobs? Where are they going to work? So it was largely going to be places that rely on low-skilled, low-wage economies. That was largely where we got. For us, we have the perverse thing. About 8 years ago, we did a census on our field workers, people who were picking cabbages. We're doctors and dentists and vets picking cabbages. Really? Is that a good use of... Somebody else has trained them, fine. Don't get me wrong, I'm not a great lover of going to other countries and nicking their qualified people and bringing them here. But if they are choosing to come here and do rubbish jobs, in terms of what they're earning and what they're putting back in, why don't we kind of strip out the good ones and get them into the skill bases where we need them? I can't get people into a doctor, but why have I got Latvian doctors working in rubbish jobs? So we don't even do that. There's no state matching of people coming in. There's no... we don't interview people saying, all right, if you want to come to the country on holiday, fine, happy days. If you want to come and work, fine, happy days. But if you want to come and get on working, why don't you fill in this form that tells us where you used to live, what you used to do, what you're qualified to do. Then have some policy that says, actually, with a little bit of English as a first, second language training here or whatever, or tidying up their degree in this, where you can say, actually, that person can now do that job at that level.
But a Latvian can work as a doctor in the NHS. I mean, perhaps he doesn't want to. Perhaps he preferred to pick cabbages. I mean, there are no restrictions on Latvians working in the NHS. They're within the EU. They can do what they like.
When we first went into the fields to interview people, they were in a position where they weren't able to work with inside their qualified professions in the state for various reasons. I'll dig out a copy of our report if you want to see it. It's donkeys old now, but...
No, that would be interesting. One question I have is, what do you think central government could be doing more of to support communities where there are high levels of migration? Is there anything else, either on housing, on schools, on hospitals, where you think local government could be better supported?
Yeah, certainly around housing. The access to registered social housing grant now for building new stock is virtually dried up. I mean, it's always been never enough money to go round, but that needs to be added to. There's no point in just redistributing the pot around amongst councils in general, because then all you're going to do is create bad feelings between communities, not within communities. If somebody in South Holland is spending the money that was spent in Liverpool last year, that's not going to help with community cohesion. It will do in South Holland, but it's not going to exactly make it work between Liverpool and South Holland. So if we're going to carry on bringing people in, which I think we will do, no matter what anybody says they're going to do, we will still carry on bringing in people just because of the age demographic of the British people. We're not going to be able to fulfil our needs of our elderly citizens without bringing in more people. Then we need to make sure that resource does follow them through then. And that is a government's job, because they're going to be taking central taxation off the people. They just need to make sure that they redistribute it amongst those councils additionally that need it. It's not asking for free money, it's asking for the money that the government currently take out of my area in income tax and fuel duty and all the rest of it. Let me keep a piece of that.
First of all, clarification, the reason they don't use other data is because uncertainty is so big in that data that you cannot use it to distribute money. So sometimes you get 8,000 migrants, but that goes from 0 to 20,000. So there's a range there related to other non-census data. But one of the things you talk about was seasonal migration. So you may get some people going there for 3 or 4 months, and those people may not be counted at all in any of the official statistics, even in the census, because they're not residents of the UK. I mean, first of all, do you have that, and what do you do about those seasonal migrants? Because they're going to still use infrastructure, they're going to still use the hospital, they're going to still use things, and they're not going to be counted at all. So even the money, the government basically is not going to give you any money regarding those migrants.
Yeah, I mean, seasonal migration, again, only speaking from a rural South Holland perspective, I can't do this on a national basis, but from my own perspective, the seasonal stuff used to be picking things in fields largely. That was kind of cabbages and whatever else we grow in the fields. But most of my businesses then started adding value to those products, which is why the industry's still there. So the seasons don't exist anymore, they just carry on. You know, there will be a season for one thing, but in the factories they'll be processing whatever's coming in. We buy flowers in from South Africa and package them up and send them out. If you have a sandwich day, if you go and get one out of Marks and Spencer's, that almost certainly will be made in South Holland. And we don't make the bread. And if you have my chief executive used to use it, a brie and grape sandwich. We don't grow grapes, we don't make brie, and we don't make bread. But that sandwich will be made in South Holland. That would have left home about 4 hours before I did this morning. And so that'll be people who work and stay, or few go. But most people stay for a long time there.
But they can't pay good enough wages to attract British citizens who have other opportunities, who have a welfare state to protect them. I mean, they have to pay such low wages that only people from poorer countries with lower wage expectations will do those jobs. Is that right?
No, they all. Probably if you went back 8 or 9 years ago, there was massive exploitation. Gang masters were just bringing people in and treating them like slaves. But they were all people that largely weren't able to access the workplace anyway. And they were tying up not only we can sort you a job out, we can sort your transport out to a job, and we can sort out your accommodation. So there was a lot of exploitation all the way round then. Now the networks are strong enough, most people find their own accommodation through Main Street agents. Most of that's done. We've still got 1 or 2 people who kind of have mass units. We had a couple of builders who used to build and not sell. They used to just house their workers in them, which worked for a while. And we used to do it as a country, didn't we? My family moved out of London to Stevenage because they went to build Stevenage. So they built a few houses and we lived in some of them. And then they carried on building some more houses. So that's not unusual. But the wages now are, everybody's paid well above minimum wage in those areas because there's the demand for workers. And the usual thing, if you can't get people to meet the demand, you've got to up the ante a little bit. But local people still, there aren't enough to fill the need. Now, I don't know whether that's largely through choice and not wanting to do those lower skilled jobs, or whether it's through the fact that we don't have that many people able to do it, but we've got virtually no unemployment.
There are also a lot of locals who work in those factories. Yeah. And do they get on relatively well? I mean, is there a reasonable mixing between the outsiders and the...
Yeah, the biggest tensions we get are generally in the summer when people come out off a shift work and are sitting on the side of the river drinking a tin of beer at 7:30 in the morning. And my local people don't understand that 7:30 in the morning is the same as them finishing at 5:30 in the evening and having a beer somewhere. And it's that kind of getting that into people's heads. But that's not just migrant workers. Yeah, British workers do the same thing. No, my people who work night shift do not go home and go back to bed. They go home and do the same as I do during the day. They'll have a couple of hours before they go back to bed. But it's that the English workers will go home and have a bottle of beer and sit indoors and have it if that's what they're doing, or go to one of the early morning bars. They won't sit on the river and do it. And the migrants are sitting on the river doing it, and that just is in people's faces. But it's just a perception thing.
I mean, you're also in a part of the country where arguably that sort of narrative on immigration with British workers is being articulated by a party like UKIP, and quite successfully in places like Boston and South Holland. Where are the main parties locally going wrong on that issue? How's that market kind of just been opened up and mobilised? I mean, what's happening locally politically that's sort of not connecting?
Oh, I don't think there is anything. It's quite. I've probably got one of the most right-wing Conservative MPs in the country, and certainly one of the most outspoken on migration.
Who's that?
John Hayes. Boston had one of the most outspoken MPs on migration for a long time, Richard Boddy. So it's not that they're not, that it's not that they don't understand it. I think largely it's people don't trust us. That's the single biggest thing. And I don't think the rise in UKIP is just around immigration. Well, I think that's the banner they wave to a lot of people. But I think UKIP's real bubble is people's dissatisfaction with mainstream politics in itself. I don't think it really is around the migration issue.
Yeah. Let me repackage the question. How would you re-establish trust on immigration with voters?
By telling people that you recognise there's an issue. Stop telling people that there is no issue, because if they think there is an issue, there is an issue. It doesn't have to be factually accurate if it's their perception. It's their perception, and until we start engaging with people on the yes, we understand that that's what you're seeing every day, and then let them believe that we actually understand them so that we can start to address the positives. And that's the thing, we never get past the having to deal with the negatives, because we always say, oh, it's no problem. Boston's had that immigration commission, that report will be out. Really? It's drivel. People of Boston haven't bought into that. They don't believe what's in that. It doesn't reflect what the people of Boston think. If you went around Boston High Street with it in the morning and waved it in front of a load of people, they'd say that's not our reflection of what it's like. So we don't trust you, because you've asked us some questions, we've given you some answers, and you've sanitised all the answers you didn't like to prepare this report. And we've got to find a way of, without making it worse by saying we agree with you, is actually understand that there is a problem, and then hopefully they'll trust us enough to start doing some of the solution stuff.
Just on schools, do schools in your local area or schools who are lobbying the LGA, what do they say about kids with English as an additional language? Is that a big issue that comes up in terms of the resources and the skills that schools have to deal with that?
Yeah, all schools will tell you that wherever there's additional resource is necessary just to get those kids up to speed in terms of kind of understanding the language, but I'm not sure how many people tell you the benefits of having them in schools are. Whatever you put into a kid, you can send back home through the kid. We do it with recycling. We brainwash children about recycling. They go home and badger their parents. Recycling goes up. It's straightforward. Every mum and dad does whatever that small person tells them to do, because that's just how we're wired, or else we'd be eating the little. So we kind of defer to children all the time. So anything the state puts into the children in schools has got to be good, because that don't only affect the children, it affects the parents as well. And what probably very few will tell you, but I know from the South Holland perspective is true, the attainment levels of our own Indigenous population go up with a strong migrant population in the school, particularly in my experience, Poland.
Is that anecdotal?
Well, I'm not sure whether they'll be able to ever justify it, or whether it suits anybody to justify it, but
You could measure it.
Well, it's the London story is partly. London's educational outcomes have improved enormously in the last 10 or 15 years, and people put that down partly to aspirational immigrants.
But does anyone locally intuitively think that is? I mean, could you get that across? Actually, it's been good for your kids because they've got more of the experience of the world they're growing up into. Or do people think, well, they all turned up without the language, so how could that have worked?
You can tell people, but it's whether you can make them listen to you when you're telling them. I mean, the Polish kids in my senior schools have got my kids generally in those particular schools to do really well, because we still have selective education. So we kind of filtered out people who are academically minded and put them into the grammar schools. And the attainment levels were at a certain level for the rest of the school. No fault of the school, but just kind of these are the kids that they've got left over. So that's what they're working with. And we've seen that level go up, and the academic achievement in those schools go up. This is going to be of absolutely no use to you, but anecdotally I love it. The only child from my village primary school to go to Cambridge went to one of our worst, if you can believe that, secondary schools. The only child from my village. And that largely is, obviously having parents who were
Polish, or were they?
No, it's an English child, but the kind of
Polish students, Polish people
that
had a positive impact.
to get on and kind of do things. I mean, we all know if you're prepared to pick up your family and move to a completely foreign place. There must be something about you. And purely selfishly, from a conservative perspective and not any academic perspective, if the Conservative Party doesn't grab hold of these people and misses them the same way as we missed the people in the 50s, we will be consigning ourselves to a minority party at some point. Because largely, anybody with the get up and go to drag their sorry self across the world to go somewhere else to set up again, they are. Yeah. They must be our people.
How would you advise the party to attract them and to deal with its past?
We're trying to in South Holland and working with King's Lynn to try and get into the Lithuanian and Latvian communities. I mean, they make me look like a soft lefty half the time. It really is. You know, I kind of feel a little bit in a bit strange place, but the party's just got to get its image changed. We've really got to stop beating the drum about all migration's bad. And we do need to accept the fact that the population at large, when they want to have a whipping boy, immigration's a good whipping boy, because that's talking about different people. And if you're going to have a go at somebody, it's always better to have a go at somebody who's different. We need to find.
It's not a good idea to have a tens of thousands target. Should that be?
It's not achievable, is it? Yeah, it plays well for certain newspapers, but it's not achievable. You can't stop it. Certainly, European migration, which is vast bulk of migration, you can't stop it. That's tied and locked down. So what we need to do is find a way to maximise it. Economically, we're doing that, aren't we? You know, if you take away all your Polish bricklayers and plumbers, forget about building. No matter how good the boom comes, we haven't resourced the building industry to do that with our indigenous population. We haven't resourced it in terms of materials. We have to buy in bricks from Holland, really, and we have to buy in bricklayers from Poland.
But we should be resourcing, shouldn't we?
Oh yeah. Definitely we should, and from a conservative perspective, we definitely should be.
But so long as you've got a significant inflow of migrants who can do those jobs, there's going to be no incentive to do those things domestically. You can just keep buying the answer off the shelf from abroad.
There is an incentive for the country to do it. You train people in recession to work when there's boom. We don't do that in this country. I am from a construction background, so I've lived through two proper big boom and busts, and the back end of one bust that never really turned into a boom as much as it should have done. But we never do it. We know that if the industry turns down and house building goes from 200,000 units a year to 50,000 units a year, we will lose a big raft of trades. Those people will go and find nice warm jobs in factories, and they won't come back out onto building sites that are cold and nasty in the winter. They just won't do it. There's a certain stage in their life they're not going to come back out again. So we know at that point when recession starts is when we should be investing in skilling people up again, because the recession's going to be 4 or 5 years. 4 or 5 years, you've got some really good people who've left school who've turned into really good bricklayers.
But there's no incentive to do that when you have a relatively open migration system.
There is an incentive for the government to do it. There's no incentive for business to do it. No. Expecting me to pay for other people's trainees, which is what we used to have to do for the CITB levy, is stupid. Why would I be paying for somebody else to learn to do this when I can bring in somebody who's already qualified? But the state shouldn't be taking that short-term view. No. You know, and we could have dealt with that. We could have made sure that the manufacturers are raw materials ready. When we change policy to expect demand to kick up, we should change other policies to make sure that when the demand kicks up, it's fulfilling what we need. And we don't do that, and never have done it.
Okay, we're just going to come to sort of final set of questions. So, Kate, you had something.
Yeah, you talked about what messages the Conservative Party should be sending out. But in your final words, can you touch a bit more on your experience of message discipline within the Conservative Party on this? And how is the Conservative Party supposed to have a healthy relationship with its councillors if it's telling them what to say on the doorsteps about a very toxic issue?
The party doesn't tell us what to say on the doorsteps. The party doesn't talk to itself in that respect anyway. The parliamentary party talks to itself, but doesn't talk to the local government part of the party, and we certainly don't talk to the parliamentary party very often. There's only one real conduit for that, and that's through me being a member of the party board, and that isn't and doesn't happen. There is no link through on the ground issues between the party centrally and local government. Relationship goes from okay on a good day to being bad on an average day. So there is no.
So surely we have to fix that to change the messaging.
I'm not so sure you do. If the message is the right message, people will deliver it. They don't have to be told to deliver it. You have to make the message an attractive one for people to want to deliver. Then it doesn't matter who's telling you to say it or not say it, because if you believe it, you'll say it yourself. But
But the interesting thing is the national message that you're finding not as helpful as it could be has been constructed because it is thought it is what is needed on the ground exactly where you are. So, Westminster thinks it's got the message right for you. But it's obviously not hearing very much from you about how you'd balance that message.
Immigration's only an issue when you link it with something else, and it's the thing that's wrong, and immigration becomes the whipping boy for it. Europe's the classic. I've never heard anybody speak about Europe on the doorstep until you start talking about other stuff, and then it's live. People are not. Well, I hate France. No, you don't. Apart from that, historically, we've always hated the French, but no, you don't. Actually, you like going over there for holidays and stuff, and so no, you don't. So people don't really do that. It's the impact in another area. So if you've got high unemployment, it's Europe's fault. If people feel insecure in what they're doing, it's Europe's fault. And if we know that to be true, which I think we do as a party, then playing the immigration stuff the way we have been isn't going to fix it.
Okay, thank you very much, Gary, and thank you very much for coming. I'm sorry that Professor Michael Keith wasn't here, but you got just you and us, which was.
I'm sorry I couldn't do the proper technical answers that you might have been asking for in terms of numbers.
We're sick
and
of
stuff.
that. We've had that all day.
But if you do want any of that kind of proper techie stuff, then make sure you email me. And I won't give it to you. I'll just pass it on to other people and make them give it to you. So it's not like I'm not agreeing to do any lifting.
You said that, although you didn't give it a very good write-up, you mentioned there was this report done on integration or something in Boston.
Well, Boston have got one, and we did one about 5 or 6 years ago. So I'll try and get hold of both copies of those and get those across to you. But I think mine was a little more reflective of the actual situation on the ground, and Boston's, as far as I can see by the public reaction to it, looked too much of a whitewash.
No, very interesting. Thank you very much. It's very helpful.